So, for example, the prophecy, out of Egypt came my son.
Yeah.
That's not Jesus telling anyone about it. That's
How
just
do you
Matthew
know?
telling us the account.
How do you know?
Because he's telling the story of how Jesus came back from Egypt.
Why would it not make sense that Jesus takes that time to say, hey, so I'm revealing all this stuff to you, I'm doing all these miracles, I'm allowing you to worship me, I'm going to tell you, by the way, in this specific part of the Old Testament where it mentions this quote, that was actually a prophecy about me. Why could he never have done that? Because isn't it not the same in where it talks about how Muhammad said that they prophesied about him in the Torah and the Injil?
He said Torah and Injil.
Right. But if you go, aha, Deuteronomy 18:18, that is a prophecy about Muhammad. Can I go, aha, no, that's not true. Why? Because in the Quran it never says Deuteronomy 18:18.
Can you explain to me what it means that Jesus is sinless?
Sure. It means it was free from moral error. So in
sin.
other words, yes.
Okay, now, do all humans sin without exception?
Those who are just human, yeah.
Those who are just human, okay, sin. So without exception, whether intentional, unintentional, any type of sin, major sin, minor.
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay, cool. Now, was Jesus fully human?
Yes.
But that means it's impossible that he's sinless.
Why?
Because he's fully human.
Is he not also fully divine?
Yeah, but that means he's not fully human. Because
Why?
if you explain away that he's
Are you
sinless
fully flesh?
Yeah,
Are you fully spirit?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, as a Muslim, you would say, I have a spirit, because when I die, I want to go to Jannah.
Right,
yes,
yes,
you're going to go to Jannah. Isn't that the whole thing?
Yeah, true.
So you actually agree with me that you can be fully something and also fully something else.
Yeah. But
If I said 100%, that would be a
my problem. My problem is if you explain away the fact that he's sinless because he was also fully divine, then that means he's not fully human. Because in order to be fully human, you have to sin. You cannot be fully human and not sin. And the way you explain that he's sinless is because he's also divine.
Remember when you asked me?
Remember
when you asked me whether humans all sin, necessarily, and I said those who are just human, yes.
Yeah.
And I was very careful with that word because we as Christians believe that Christ was both fully human and fully divine.
Well, that's that's the whole point. That's the problem. Because if you explain away the fact that he's sinless with the fact that he was also divine, does that mean he was not fully human? Because
you seem to think there's a contradiction between fully human and fully divine.
It contradicts his human nature that he's sinless. Because within his human nature, he has to sin. He cannot say he's fully human if he's sinless. That's a contradiction.
Wait. So we would say that his divinity, in a way unknown to us, permeated his humanity at times.
That means he's not 100% human.
Why?
Because if his divine side prevents him from sinning, then that means...
Well, let me give you an example. So in this case, his divine side at times revealed in, for example, John chapter 21, as a story in which Jesus said, Peter actually says to Jesus, we believe you know all things. Yeah. And it's repeated elsewhere. And there are times in which it says, in his spirit, he knew something that he couldn't have known otherwise.
Yeah.
And our understanding of this is that in his divinity, it was revealed to his humanity a particular thing, whatever that might be. It might be the hearts of the Pharisees that he was engaging with, for example, right? Yeah. Right. I don't think that's a contradiction that somehow makes him no longer human. I also don't think it's something that makes him no longer divine. All I simply think it means is that his divine nature had some kind of relationship with his human nature.
Okay, well, that makes sense. However, my whole, like I keep saying, I'm going to repeat myself. The understanding is that he's 100% human and 100% divine.
I wouldn't say 100%, no. I would say fully, which is what you said to me.
What that means?
It means you fully embody something, right?
Yeah.
So you fully embody what it means to be in flesh, because you have flesh, right?
Yeah.
And there's no way that in a sense of you, there isn't flesh, because all of you is flesh. But in the same way, you also fully embody what it means to be spirit, because you have a spirit at the same time.
Would you agree that at least a lot of Christians say that he's 100? Use the word 100%?
Yeah, I wish they wouldn't. I think that is error to say 100%.
Yeah.
I think it's because people want to try and dilute things in a way that isn't philosophically accurate. It's just convenient to say. You know what I mean? Like, to be honest, this is something that happens in all of our religions, right?
Yeah, right.
Like, I imagine this probably happens when things are brought up about Aisha. You know, they probably just use some kind of language that's just easy to communicate rather than have to go through the whole thing and bring up all the hadiths, you know. So, yeah. You're right about that, though. They shouldn't say 100%.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm not still sure. Because, then atonement then.
Sure.
Because, the passage of atonement that Paul says for sin to be forgiven, there must be shedding of blood. What is it? How does he say it exactly?
So there's an understanding, like going back to Judaism in the Old Testament, that for forgiveness of sin there has to be shedding of blood, right? there has to be a sacrifice, something that is denied of yourself. The idea being in Judaism that you take the greatest of an animal, like a sheep or a goat, you deny yourself of it, and you give it up to the God Yahweh in a form of a sacrifice.
Yeah, what does the
Deny,
problem?
sorry, what do you mean deny? Why? Deny? What, I don't understand.
Because otherwise you would eat it. Like when you kill an animal,
sacrifice,
you,
they throw it away.
Huh?
So when they sacrifice it, they throw it away.
No, I think it's the Levi priests. I think eat it. I think.
Priest eat it.
I believe so. I could be wrong about that.
have to
Well,
eat
but there are certain things. For example, there's a burnt offering, which I think is just you burn it. So I don't think there's any, burnt. So there are different kinds of offerings. There's a wave offering, a burnt offering. So there are different kinds of things in a ritual, right? But the idea fundamentally is that you deny yourself something that otherwise you would have eaten. You know, it's like a cow or sheep or whatever, and you give it to the Lord instead as a sacrifice in order to atone for the things that you have done, not just individually but also collectively.
Yeah, but that's the whole problem with it, because the concept of atonement is not that the forgiveness of sin, there must be shedding of blood. The whole concept is that the sacrifice, that part, is only for unintentional sin. So the fact that Paul says these things is kind of, you're ripping...
I heard like that.
It's ripping out the scripture and taking it out of context, because for intentional sin, for the biggest of sins, the way to forgive those sins is to turn and confess and to repent and not to shed any blood.
Well, that's according to Islamic belief. But even in Islamic belief, you have the same idea.
That's Jewish belief.
Well, remember that we're talking about the Jews today, the rabbinic Jews, that have come from 2nd or 3rd century AD and have developed into what they are today. Whereas at the time it would have been Second Temple Judaism, you understand, which has slightly different beliefs.
Yeah.
They didn't have the Talmud, for example.
Yeah.
There wasn't Talmud.
Yeah.
So the way they did halakha, the way they did law, came more specifically from the Torah and arguably an oral tradition, as some Jewish people say.
Yeah.
Right? So there is a distinction there. But what I'm saying here is, I don't think that Paul took something out of context. I think, and you'll find this in the New Testament, there are people, the disciples of Christ, Christ himself, and Paul, look at the Old Testament and they understand it in a way that was different from what they did before.
No. I think maybe I'll also another instances. However, this is the one I want to focus on. And why is it relevant? Why did you mention the Talmud?
Because they didn't. Basically, I'm saying there's different Jews at different times believe different things. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Right. So Second Temple Judaism was different from Talmudic rabbinic Judaism. Is what I'm getting at. And that came a few hundred years after Christ.
Well, are they different on this specific point?
I'm not sure about that, to be honest with you.
Well, then you're gonna have to look that up, because I don't think it's. I'm not sure, but I don't think it's a Talmudic thing.
Well, your understanding is that Paul was taking the Old Testament out of context. My point to you is that, given that Christ is, as the New Testament records God, he has the authority to interpret the law, does he not?
Who?
Christ, Jesus.
Yeah, sure.
Right, so if he is God, which is what the New Testament says, and I can show you that if you want, then that means he has the right to do so. So if Christ says, actually, in this Old Testament, this is what this says here, this is how you should interpret it, then he has authority to do that.
Yeah, but that's Jesus is not the one that said that. Paul is the one.
But what about those who heard it from Jesus?
Did Jesus say that?
Yeah, if Jesus says something in his words, and it says, this was recorded based off, this is to fulfill the prophecy that was revealed in Jeremiah, then yeah, I have good reason to believe that Jesus told them this and they recorded it.
Yeah, but this is the word of
the
Paul.
Same tradition like Muslims.
Well, this is actually from the disciples, not Paul.
Yeah, but same tradition as Muslim people have. They have the name of the people who they can hold the way down.
We do, so for example, the evangelist John, who we believe wrote the Gospel of John, we have the writings of Polycarp, who was his disciple, and then Polycarp's disciple was Irenaeus. So we have both their writings. So.
Like this. You know, I checked them up. They have every person, what he did, where is he from, where did he live, how did he spend his life. You know, things more is.
They have the writings. They have the writings from.
No, I heard it.
So the people I'm telling you, we have writings from. So you can read them. Okay. It's gone to. All right, I'll wait.
Okay, so you said Paul heard it from the disciples.
What's that?
You said Paul heard this from the disciples.
Well, yeah, but my point really was that the disciples got it from Christ. And Christ, being that he is God in flesh, has authority to interpret the Old Testament.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, if he is God, like, that would make sense. You can see it from our perspective, right?
That's a big if.
Sure, I'm happy to talk about that. I'm happy to go through the Bible and talk with verses. Yeah.
No, that would take too long.
Yeah, well, I think it would take just a few minutes, but you know.
Okay, cool. Go on.
You want me to do it?
Yeah.
Is it
If
sure?
you're going to prove his divinity from the Gospels, you don't have to do that because.
Oh, do you believe that?
Yeah.
Good. So you've read things.
It's not a hard thing. It's not a hard
Good, good. You're honest.
Yeah.
Because there are many Muslims who will fight tooth and nail that the Gospels don't say Jesus was divine. Jesus doesn't say you can pray to him. Jesus didn't accept worship. Didn't say he was God. All these things.
Yeah,
and then when you show them it, they go, "Well, the Bible's corrupt."
The claim is that he doesn't say explicitly, and because from our how is it, philosophy, these essential creeds are something that need to be.
It has to be said explicitly.
Yeah.
Can you show me in the Quran where it's explicitly said that the angel, that the spirit of Allah that went to Mary is Angel Jibreel?
Yeah.
You show me? Yeah, I'd love to see that.
But that's not an essential creed.
I believe you. Well, it's an important one, right?
Because
you're talking about
there's a difference between the Holy Spirit being Angel Gabriel, and there's a difference between the whole essential doctrine.
Well, let me take something that definitely is very much close to your creed, which is, do you believe the Injil and the Torah have been corrupted?
Yeah.
Can you show me a single verse in the Quran that says that explicitly? But remember, we went through this earlier, and the closest you got to me was saying that some group of scribes took the Torah and then intentionally distorted its words.
Fair enough, but however, I can use Hadith as well. I don't have to. It doesn't.
Can you show me in Hadith?
Yeah.
Also, by the way, if you accept Hadith, then can I also accept the early church fathers?
It's not the same thing.
Why? Why is it?
Hadith is directly from the mouth of the Prophet.
Right, but wait, no, not always. No, it's people hearing it say it.
But essentially from his mouth.
Well, you can make an argument for that, sure, but I could also make a similar argument the early church fathers heard from Jesus, right? So if Polycarp wrote about something, the writings that we have of him, and he got his learnings from John, and John knew Jesus, is it possible that John told Polycarp things about Jesus, from Jesus? Yeah, of course so. That's an isnad, right? That's the whole premise of isnad science in Islam. You see, so if you do that, I'm also going to do it with my stuff. Which is, well, fun for me.
Let's get something straight though. Our Hadith is the version of the Gospel, is your Gospel.
Yeah, you can see it that way.
Yeah, so
although it came 200 years later, right?
Most of it.
Yeah.
However,
Sahih al-Bukhari, of the 6 most authentic books.
A lot of it was written contemporary as well. We have some contemporary books that were written within the lifetime.
Yeah, but not the 6 most authentic, I don't believe. The earliest you have of the 6 is Sahih al-Bukhari that came from, I think it's 830.
Do you know about the Sahifa of what's his name, Ibn Abi Munabbih?
No, I don't.
This is a companion of Abu Huraira who wrote down.
Do you have his writings today?
Yeah, we have them, and they prove that because for centuries, for example, we see so many of his hadiths making it to Bukhari and Muslim, but through an isnad, not throughout from this Sahifa, and that proves that the science of isnad is trustworthy.
Do you accept what is written in Sahih al-Bukhari as the authentic sayings of Muhammad?
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah, of course I do.
Okay. Do you know that opens up a lot of issues?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that.
You don't have a problem? Okay. So you know there's hadith where Muhammad is commanded to go and fight basically everybody until they either submit and say the shahada or they pay jizya tax.
Yeah.
You accept that that is the final commandment basically of Muhammad.
Okay, so I have 2 things to say about that. Number one is I'm not really versed on that. I've heard the hadith, of course.
Yeah, it's authentic.
I haven't really heard the interpretation of it.
Okay.
However, the second thing I can say is, in terms of fighting for the way of Allah, that doesn't always mean.
It can mean a jihad of struggle, not a jihad of the sword.
Doesn't always mean jihad of the sword.
Okay.
I don't think so, no.
So there's another authentic hadith where Umar is talking about it, and Umar is saying that because he heard it from the Prophet, that's what he's chosen to go and do.
Well, that's cool.
And that's in the context of fighting.
Well, that's cool.
So, I mean, you know what's interesting? When I was looking this up, I looked at it from Muslims who reject the hadith. And the reason they reject this group of Muslims, they reject it is because they cannot reconcile these things. They're basically saying, look, if you accept this as something Muhammad actually said, then we have no argument to say that this is in self-defense. Because you can argue that in the Quran...
We've never claimed that all jihad is defensive.
Right, but then that would mean that one of the most authoritative, according to the Sahaba, according to authentic hadith, commandments given by Muhammad is to go out and wage war.
Yeah.
which historically is what happened, right? Did Umar not go out? Did he not go out to Jerusalem?
Yeah, but you know,
Yeah. Did they not go out to North
He
Africa?
conquered Jerusalem.
Huh? What?
You know the story of how he conquered Jerusalem. It was a beautiful story.
Well, again, that's Islamic tradition. I can quote you authentic independent sources like Sebios and John. I think it's John the Presbyter.
Yeah.
No, I got that. I need to check. Who are independent sources who lived at the time that said, yeah, some guys who follow this guy called Muhammad. Supposedly, these guys say Muhammad was alive at this point. This is in 634. They came into Jerusalem and they massacred about 4,000 people. That's what some authentic sources say.
These are contemporary.
Yeah. From a guy called Sebios, and from someone who I think is called John the Presbyter. Is it John or Thomas the Presbyter?
Sebios, that's
Yeah. Google it, man. Have a look. You can read about this in Dr. Stephen Shoemaker. He wrote a book specifically talking about these sources.
Sebios and who?
I believe it's try John the Presbyter. It's either John the Presbyter or Thomas the Presbyter. Let me see if I can find it. John. Oh, actually, I have a reference to it here. I should be able to find it. No, I think I deleted. Okay, I'm gonna have to Google it. John the.
Is it this guy?
Possibly. When was he around? No.
202.
No, I don't think
No,
it's.
no, that's not him. John appears in fragments by place. Early second bishop? No, I don't think it's him.
Okay, well,
anyhow.
have a research into it either way. But Sebios is one of them, and I think it's either John or Thomas the Presbyter. That's Presbyterian.
Okay.
But yeah, those sources say Muhammad didn't die in 632. It says he actually lived at least 2 years after that. You know, it's interesting, right? I think there are many issues in the Quran that I don't think can be reconciled.
I think the same with the Gospels as well.
What particularly? What in particular?
Matthew in particular.
Sure.
The way he uses the prophecies, mainly the way he uses the prophecies from the Old Testament and try to kind of say this was fulfilled in Jesus.
But why would that be an issue if the claims of the gospel are correct? It wouldn't, would it?
It would.
Why?
It means he's ripping off the Old Testament.
But this is someone who supposedly knew Jesus, right?
Supposedly.
And if he did, then Jesus, and if the gospel's report he is God, and if that's correct, then it's completely fine for him to do that.
No, it's not.
Why?
So, for example, you said Jesus, if he's divine, and we can verify that, then his way of interpreting the Torah can be valid.
Yep.
But Matthew is not. Matthew is just inspired. So it's not. He's not really taking the word from Jesus.
No. You understand? When he's writing the gospel is kind of like a Roman Greek autobiography. Or biography, sorry, not autobiography. Biography. So basically, it's someone claiming to have known these things, gathered this information from people who also saw it, and then he's writing an account. So he is quoting Jesus' words, but he's also wrapping it in the story of his. So it would be a bit like if I came up to you and I was like, what's your name, by the way? Amir. If I was like, Amir, what happened at Speaker's Corner today? And you were like, well, I met this guy called Chris. He was a Christian. He said this and this.
Yeah.
And you could probably quote some of my words, right?
Yeah.
He was saying this about the Trinity, how it's three persons, one God. And,
Yeah.
Right. And that would be my words, because that's what I did say.
Yeah.
Right. So in the same way, the writers are writing the Gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Yeah, however, it's not particularly the same for many reasons, and one of them being is Matthew is not quoting Jesus when he says so that what was said by the prophet.
How do you know he's not?
Because he doesn't quote him.
Does he have to?
He says it on his own.
If he quotes Jesus and then afterwards adds this was fulfilled in this prophecy, saying in the Old Testament, how do you know Jesus didn't tell him that, and that's why he's
Because
making
he
reference
didn't
to it?
say it.
But that's not how human language works.
Yeah, at least you'd expect him.
That would be like me. That would be like you saying, "Yeah, I talked to a guy called Chris, and he talked about the Trinity, and
so
he was
for
saying
example,
the Trinity, and then." But you're not quoting my words directly, but you're just summarizing it. That's still
Yeah,
fine.
so for example,
because I still
when
said
Jesus
it.
comes back from Egypt and he says so that the words of the prophet can be fulfilled, that my son from out of Egypt came my son. Do you think that Jesus came from Egypt and told him that, or so that? How do you think Jesus could have possibly told him that?
How do you mean? Say it again.
So, for example, the prophecy out of Egypt came my son.
Yeah.
That's not Jesus telling anyone about it. That's
How
just
do you
Matthew
know?
telling us the account.
How do you know?
Because he's telling the story of how Jesus came back from Egypt.
Right, but
Yeah.
he was a guy who supposedly knew Jesus, one of his disciples. He was
Yeah.
Levi the tax collector, who was called away from that to spend his life instead following Jesus in the last 3 years of his life.
Yeah, but
So why would it not make sense that Jesus takes that time to say, hey, so I'm revealing all this stuff to you, I'm doing all these miracles, I'm allowing you to worship me, I'm going to tell you, by the way, in this specific part of the Old Testament where it mentions this quote, that was actually a prophecy about me. Why could he never have done that?
because it would have mentioned it probably.
It would have mentioned what?
It would have mentioned it.
But wait, it does. You just don't like that he's like, hang on a second, I can't just summarize this. I have to quote what Jesus said and then quote what Jesus said in the exact way he said it. No, that's the exact word fallacy. Like you could say, yeah, I am a and I met this guy called Chris, and he said the Trinity is not three gods. Now, I might not have said exactly those words. I might have said the Trinity is three persons in one God. But you still correctly said what I was talking about, right? You didn't misquote me. You didn't say something that wasn't untrue or something that I wouldn't have said anyway. Right.
Yeah, but I'm talking. Okay, cool. Okay.
I think you're struggling with this.
No, I don't.
Because isn't it not the same in, or is it Surah 7, Ayah 157, where it talks about how Muhammad said that they prophesied about him in the Torah and the Injil, and also the Psalms, I think.
He said Torah and Injil.
Right. But if you go, Deuteronomy 18:18, that is a prophecy about Muhammad.
Yeah.
Can I go, no, that's not true. Why? Because in the Quran it never says Deuteronomy 18:18.
Yeah, but
you'd be like, no, that's not how it works. You would call me out on that.
Because that's not what the Quran says.
The Quran just says that he's prophesied, right?
Yeah, the Quran says that he's prophesied. So
right, but it doesn't say that these are the specific prophecies that Muhammad said he was in. Right?
Yeah, he doesn't have to.
Right. Likewise in the Quran, it doesn't quote Jesus word by word saying this was this specific prophecy, right? Yeah. It simply summarizes it by saying Jesus was referring to this particular prophecy, which he is in perfect rights to do because he was there and talking to Jesus at the time. Likewise, whenever Muhammad is writing these things, Muhammad was there. He could have told the Sahaba, this is the prophecies. Maybe he did. Maybe Muhammad said Deuteronomy 18:18 is the prophecy. You don't know though, but you're within your rights to say. I will, of course, fight you tooth and nail on the idea that Deuteronomy 18:18 is about Muhammad. Yeah. I don't believe it is, because he didn't breach the name of Yahweh and he wasn't an Israelite. But yeah.
Neither, I don't think the name Yahweh is in the New Testament either. It's not.
Do you know why?
Why?
Because the New Testament borrowed from the Septuagint. Do you know what the Septuagint is?
Yeah, but the Septuagint, from what I've seen...
The Septuagint have the name of Yahweh?
I'm not sure, I don't know.
No. But the reason why is because it wasn't written in Hebrew, it was written in Greek. The Septuagint came 300 years before Christ, and it is a Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures.
Yeah, however.
And when they translate the holy name, they didn't think it appropriate to translate it into the Greek equivalent. Yeah, which is why you don't see Yahweh in the New Testament or the Septuagint.
From what I've seen, the Septuagint, the original Septuagint, was only the 5 books of Moses, and it was not the whole Torah. And the rest of the Torah was translated into the Septuagint later. After it outdates, it comes after the Gospels.
Well, it might be the case that we have manuscripts that are later from certain parts, but generally speaking, the Septuagint was a complete translation of the Hebrew text. So, for example, we have documents from people in Egypt, in Cairo, asking people from Jerusalem to give them a copy, to make them one, because they wanted to read the Hebrew scriptures in a language they understood, which was Greek at the time, because it had been Hellenized by Alexander the Great. Yeah. Right. So, yeah, I have no reason to
look into. However, I think
look into
from what I've seen, the Septuagint came after the Gospels.
No, it came before, 300 years before.
No, I'm talking about most of the Septuagint.
No, because
as the 5 books of Moses came before.
We can tell they were using the Septuagint because there are slight translation differences between the Hebrew and the Septuagint because different languages. So we can actually tell by the way the New Testament was written that it was using the Septuagint version of the scriptures.
No, that's actually the reverse argument. Because one of the arguments is we know that it came after because it quotes from the New Testament. Because
the New Testament, so for example, there are epistles that Paul wrote where he's referencing scriptures in the Old Testament, and the particular way he's quoting them comes from the Septuagint. It has little hints in the way the words are formatted. The hints he's referring to the Greek version. So we know there was a Greek version.
However,
look into it. But do you understand how there's a lot more to this? There's a lot more to Christianity than perhaps you've first thought of. And there's a lot more to Islam. There's a whole thing that you have to affirm as a Muslim that I wouldn't affirm because I would struggle to affirm it.
Like what?
Well, I would have to affirm that the earliest manuscripts we have of the Injil and the Torah are not correct, and that there was secretly another one that we have no mention of, no manuscripts of, no evidence of, and I have to accept it because a guy who came 600 years later said so. You know, I mean, like for example, so when we talk about the New Testament, the authority comes from Jesus, who actively showed it. So Jesus did miracles. He actively showed he is an authority by God here because he is God. Yeah. With Muhammad, what authority did he give you? He went to the Hira cave. He had revelation from Jibreel in the Hira cave. Yeah. No one was there at the time. He came out the Hira cave. He thought he might have seen a demon. He tried to kill himself on some occasions. He tried to throw himself off a high place. He was convinced by a Christian that actually it was a revelation. Then he started to take it seriously, and then he became a prophet of what we now know as Islam. Like, that is very sketchy ground. I would rather base my belief on a man who demonstrated it physically to people. Jesus went and he fed the 5,000. He didn't say, guys, I went into this cave. Trust me, none of you saw it, but I had a revelation from Jibril, and now I'm going to tell you what it is. By the way, I used to think it was a demon, but I know it's not a demon anymore.
Well,
You would find that difficult, right? I would find that difficult. I couldn't believe that.
Yeah, for example, you quoted how he tried to kill himself. However, this is not something I'm well versed into, but I've seen that.
You're aware that this is authentic, right?
It's not
You can find this as part of the Sirah. Yeah, it's authentic.
No, it's not.
Do you know that according to authentic Sirah, I'm going to quote Ibn Ishaq and I'm going to quote Al-Tabari, history of Al-Tabari, Muhammad, when he led in prayer while reciting Surah 53, and when he got to Ayah 21, the devil interjected words into his recitation, and he said that Alat Munuzza Amanat, their intercession is valid for you.
Yeah, you know.
You find that in early Muslim sources.
Yeah, I know.
Right, so it is authentic then?
No.
Why is it not authentic? I can quote you 50 different narrations.
I know you can quote a lot of
Right,
narrations.
so
it's a popular story, however.
The early Muslims believed.
It's an early story, however.
Al-Tabari believed it. Ibn Ishaq believed it. Ibn Ishaq wrote the first full biography that we have, by the way.
Yeah, they're free to make their own interpretations. However,
Well, according to you, they're just. I mean, why do they even believe this? Why do they believe that Muhammad spoke the words of Shaitan? Why?
It was a story at the time. However,
That they believed.
Do you know the Albani?
Well, my understanding of Albani is the modern scholar of whom.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He wrote a very good book, like proving that this story is not authentic.
I can read you a book from someone a Muslim who dedicated his life's work to this, called it's called Before Orthodoxy. Let me find it for you. And he quotes 50 different narrations, and he goes through them all.
Albani quotes all the narrations as well, and he goes through all of them, and he proves that this, at the end of the day, this is not something to be authentic.
But why though? Like, according to what standard? Like, wait. I'm quoting the greatest scholars of history of Islam.
Albani is one of the great scholars of Hadith.
When did he come? When was he? Is this a modern scholar?
He's not. Yeah, pretty modern.
Isn't he in the 80s or something?
Yeah, 80s.
Right, I'm quoting you someone who was 200 years after the Prophet.
Yeah.
Ibn Ishaq was in 700s. You understand
but that means Albani is in a better position to look back.
No. All right, I'll quote you a modern scholar then. And my modern scholar is going to say that, the early Ummah believed that Muhammad had Shaitan's word cast onto his mouth, and Allah later corrected him. And they had no problem with that. I mean, I've read this stuff. It's pretty much. I mean, this Muslim scholar concludes that it isn't true because he cannot accept it theologically, but he accepts that the early Ummah definitely believed it. And he thinks that basically it was a superhero narrative. It was the idea that Muhammad, he was going through this strife and this persecution in Mecca. He just wanted the pagans to accept his message of Allah, so he altered it because Shaitan threw in the words, and then Muhammad corrected him afterwards, and he repented, and that was it. It's seen as a hero story. The early Ummah believed this actually happened.
Well, I'm not. I'm gonna go with Albani.
Oh,
there's a lot. Do you know?
Why'd you go with Albani and not Al-Tabari and not Ibn Ishaq and others, tons of others? What some of the earliest and some of the best?
Yeah, but this is a story just like any other story that there can be difference on.
But my friend,
would you agree?
If I was a Muslim, I would have to affirm that probably happened, or at the very least, the early Ummah believed it happened. The early Sahaba believed it happened.
No, you say that because you're a Christian.
No, that's what I
You say if I was a Muslim.
I changed the battery. But I'm quoting someone of whom quotes the earliest sources and says, look, they are so numerous, there is no way on earth that the early Ummah did not believe this. Otherwise, why do we keep finding it? It's actually, Al-Tabari, we find it in his tafsir as well. He has the histories of Al-Tabari, and he also has his own tafsir. He references it in both. Ibn Ishaq, the earliest autobiography of Muhammad, that we find it in there. My friend, if I was a Muslim, I would have to say that, probably.
The only authentic chain that goes back to that specific story is one that doesn't mention the whole story about the Naqan.
There's hadith that makes reference to it in Sahih al-Bukhari.
Sorry?
It's only a reference in passing because he doesn't reveal the whole thing. He basically says, I'll bring it up for you if you want. He says, Muhammad led prayer at this particular time, and he was going through Surah 53, And then at the end of it, all the pagans, all the jinns, and all of the people that were there bowed down in prostration.
I lost you. I lost you. Can you say that again?
So
he was leading prayer.
He was leading prayer, and he was reciting Surah 53.
Yeah.
I can't remember what Surah 53, the Arabic name is for it. But when he had finished,
Yeah.
all of the jinn, all of the pagans, and all of the humans that were there
Yeah.
bowed down in prostration.
And after he finished.
Huh?
After he finished.
Yeah, after he finished. After he
Yeah.
finished going through Surah 53. Surah 53 is the very thing I'm quoting to you.
Yeah, I know.
And why would jinns and pagans bow down? The reason why is because this hadith is clearly referencing this narration. Is it not? Why would it?
The reason they bow down. The reason they
Surah
bow-
53. And the jinns and the pagans.
I'm not sure if references jinns and pagans.
Do you want me to find it for you? I'll find it for you.
Yeah,
Maybe,
sure.
I don't want you to think I'm lying. Let me find it for you.
The reason the pagans bow down at least is because of the.
It's Sahih al-Bukhari 4862. And I'll read it out loud. Here we go. The Prophet performed a prostration when he finished reciting Surah al-Najm, and all the Muslims and pagans and jinns and human beings prostrated along with him. Here you are. That's sunnah.com. There it is. And we can go over here. That's Sahih al-Bukhari 4862. And
It's not the complete story because I know there's from the authentic one.
You can read it as much as you want, my friend. Get up on your phone.
Yeah, but what I know from the. Let me help you.
So according to Hadith,
No.
Muhammad apparently led Surah Najm in prostration, and the jinns and the pagans and all the human beings bowed down in prostration. It's referencing this well-known story at the time that
Yeah.
comes from Al-Tabari, it comes from Ibn Ashaq.
Yeah.
There you are, there you go, okay, there you are then.
What I did say is, no, because I've done not too much, but a fair amount of research on this.
I've looked into it as well, and
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, if I was a Muslim, I'd have to say, yeah, it happened, or at least the early Ummah thought it happened. The Sahaba thought it happened.
Well,
It's Sahih Bukhari.
yeah, I'm not saying. Look, the authentic version of it is that he recited the surah,
Surah Najm.
and then by
yeah.
the end, these guys prostrated because it was kind of a powerful.
So the
surah.
jinns decided, oh, you know, we're gonna stop like disobeying Allah now. No, come on. They bowed down because he had said something that they could have affirmed to, and that's why the pagans did, because that's exactly what is found in Ibn Ashaq and Al-Tabari. At the end of it, it actually works. The pagans do actually bow down.
Yeah, they do.
Right, because he said that Alat, Munuzza, and Manat as three gods are separate underneath Muhammad, basically underneath Allah. Sorry, their intercession is worthy. That's what the verse was. Surah An-Najm, which is Surah 53, Ayah 21. That's what it used to be. But then Muhammad goes away, and Jibreel comes to him later and says, "No, Muhammad, you have erred. The shaitan cast these words into your mouth. That's not correct." And that's why today's Qurans don't have it. They have the corrected version, which is from Jibreel.
Well, different opinions, I guess.
Can I ask you a question, mate?
Yeah, sure.